Welcome to the 2717 podcast. I'm Javier, an authentic wedding filmmaker.
And I'm Ashley, a passionate wedding photographer.
We're here to bring Proverbs 27:17 to the wedding industry. As iron sharpens iron,
so one person sharpens another. In this fun series, we're all about sharing experiences and building a community.
Expect heartfelt stories, creative inspiration, and some amazing behind-the-scene moments.
Plus, insights from some truly inspiring guests.
Tune in to connect with us, spark your creativity,
and be a part of a supportive community.
You're listening to the 2717 podcast.
Planning your wedding isn't just about choosing a venue, it's about finding the perfect backdrop for one of the most meaningful moments of your life. That's where Juliana Estate comes in. Nestled in the heart of Lakeland, this elegant estate gives you that classic scenic charm, like a movie set, but it's all yours. Think lush greenery, romantic gardens, and plenty of room for unforgettable moments with the people you love the most. It's a place where every detail feels personal because it's not just a venue. It's where your story begins. See how Juliana Estate can make your wedding day truly yours at julianaestate.com. Thanks for sponsoring today's podcast.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Javi.
And I'm Ashley, and welcome back to the 2717 podcast. We have a super special guest today, someone that I'm honored to call one of my best friends, Heaven Weaver. Hi, Heaven.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm super honored and excited to be here.
We are so happy to have you on the podcast. Heaven is the owner of Heavenly Collective, a wedding planning business here located in Florida. And she's actually planning my wedding as well in 2025. So we're so excited to dive into all things wedding planning today.
I'm excited. I love wedding planning. And I love you, and I love you. I have the honor of knowing you guys personally, so I'm excited to talk all things wedding planning.
Yay! So let's just dive right in. How did you get started with wedding planning?
Yeah, so growing up, I was always the friend that planned everything. I would say from middle school on, birthday parties, any type of celebration, any type of let's go on a trip together. That was always my jam. I loved planning. And that really carried over into every aspect of my life. And then in 2020, I got married, COVID bride, unfortunately. No, it worked out. It was fine. But I planned my entire wedding myself in 2020. And everyone was kind of you're going to be really stressed out. You're not going to like it. It's really, I know you like planning, but planning a wedding is just oh my gosh, it's awful. It's so stressful. And I planned my wedding in COVID, which should have been really stressful. And I was actually thriving. I loved it. I look back on that season and I'm I had so much fun. Of course there's small things that stressed me out, but for the most part, I did not feel the stress of wedding planning everyone said I was going to feel. Yeah. And I was kind of oh, I really like doing this. And then the following year, 2021, I had two really close friends of mine get married. And they were hey, we don't have enough money to hire a coordinator or a planner. Would you just want to help us out? And I said yes. And I, again, loved it. Had so much fun. That one was more of a coordinating role. And so obviously I had planned my own wedding, couldn't coordinate my own wedding. So then when I had the chance to coordinate their wedding, I was oh, this is really fun. I really enjoy this. And then from there, launched my business that fall and been here three years in business. So excited.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations for
Thank
3
you.
years.
Thank you.
Being in the brunt of wedding planning, I will say, it is tough. And that's really cool that you found it and thrived in it. Because I feel that's not a lot of brides.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm one of those people that I really thrive under pressure. I think I perform my best under pressure. So I kind of enjoy the stress of wedding planning because I think I do my best work under stress. And so if I can take the stress off the bride and I thrive under it,
right,
then why would I not? My mindset was why would I not want to turn that into a business? Why would I not want to help brides feel less stressed, you know?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And then Heaven and I actually met. We go to the same church, and Heaven had come up to me one Sunday and was hey, I'm starting this business. Will you take my branding photos? And we spent the entire day in downtown Sarasota and just talked about all things from Taylor Swift to our past lives and everything, and totally bonded and just became best friends friends ever since. So
Yeah,
I'm honored to know you.
That was so fun. That was such a
Honored to
fun
know
day. I'm honored to know you too. And I think that day was so fun too because we even like I think our like entrepreneurial spirits like got together and we even the first day that we hung out we were like, what if we planned like a styled shoot? And we were like, what if we did this? And what if we and it's just so fun to have friends that are like in that same mindset because I think it really pushes like your creativity if you have people alongside of you that are in the same area or just have like a creative like mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And how full circle too at that like retreat that we had or that styled shoot, we had Javi come, and that's where I met Javi.
Well, I know I
full
saw
circle moment.
It really is, honestly, because I saw your post and I reached out to him like,
Yeah.
hey, you guys have been like a videographer? Can I come over?
Yeah.
And that's how we met, and now we're here.
That's crazy. That's how I met you before that.
Yes.
That's how you two met.
Yeah, that's how me and
I
Javi
remember
met.
that. And then we met, I think we met at my very first year wedding planning, 2021. We did a wedding in October, and you, I think, second shot for someone. And that's how I met you. And then we've done a couple weddings together since then. So.
I know. It's been pretty crazy. It's like full circle.
So full circle moment.
I love this community because sometimes you just don't know where relationships will take you.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's what really happened here in this moment.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. And it's really interesting to see how everybody's origin story is so different.
Yeah.
Like from you planning your own wedding to then like, hey, I actually enjoy this. I think I want to make it, make it into a business. And you turn it into so. I know when I started my journey, that was not the goal. I was not wanting to become a videographer. I love tech, but it was never something that I thought I was going to be in this position.
Yeah.
Where I'm at now. So I love to hear everybody's origin story and to see where like, hey, I enjoy the planning process. I think I can add a lot of value to brides, and that's really cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm excited.
Okay. Having planned your own wedding and now planning bride's wedding, how has faith played a part into just shaping their day and being very intentional about everything that you do?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. My faith or their faith, because I think that's a double-sided question.
I like that. You know what? Yeah. Speak to it both.
Okay. Well, I have the honor of planning weddings for people that I know and people that I'm really close to where faith is like a huge proponent of their day. And if that's the case, then it's really cool to be able to sit down with them and talk to them and like, how do you want like your love for Jesus to be shown in your wedding day? And it's great to be able to sit down and have those conversations, and even just having like the experience of like, here's what I've seen in the past, like here are some different options of things you can do, whether it's like ceremony or it's like special moment during the reception or getting ready that morning, whatever it is. I love taking time even just to plan like I know people are like, oh, we want it to be spontaneous, but I find like the more you can plan and like block off times for things, the more intentional that you can be with the day, not just with your future spouse, but also with God. So like planning even like prayer moments, like, hey, and if they do a first look, like you and your future husband, like I would love like to plan out like maybe 10 minutes where you guys get away. We'll have photographer, videographer, like step back. They can still capture footage, but like you guys just pray together before like you walk into your ceremony or before you do your first look, or if it's a first touch, things like that. So that's kind of how, if it's a couple who I know loves Jesus, we sit down and we're like, hey, how can we be intentional about this? And then I also work with a lot of couples who don't have faith. They're not specifically religious. And in that case, I am never ashamed to talk about my faith. I bring it up quite often. The brides that work with me, they know like, hey, that girl goes to church. Like they probably hear about it more than they maybe want to, and that's okay. But I think for me, one of the big things is just showing everyone I come into contact with who Jesus is. So like I'm going to serve them with excellence because I know that's what Jesus would do. Like I'm going to have the patience when, things get stressful. Like I'm going to be the peace. Like wedding days can be stressful. And so I have the option when I walk into a room, like I can set the tone and I can bring the peace that I have because of Jesus. Like I can bring that into the room and let that like permeate the atmosphere. And so it's like little things like that where it's like, how can I show Jesus to these people who don't know Jesus? And then the other thing too that my couples never see is I'm always praying for my couples. So like I said, even if they don't know Jesus and they have no desire to like have a relationship with him, I am always like from the moment that they like sign on with me until their wedding day, like I'm praying for them, like I'm praying for their wedding day, I'm praying that things like go smoothly, praying for their future marriage. All of those things are like behind the scenes things that they don't see. But that's a little bit of like how I bring my faith on the wedding day, but also just in preparation for the wedding day.
Yeah, I love that. And I have brides all the time that, you know, want to have prayer moments. And I love how you said that too, where you're like, let's plan those out and make them intentional.
Yeah.
Because on a day that is so stressful, you're going to need the peace
Yep.
of the Lord.
Yep.
And you're also going to be so stressed out finishing up with touch-ups and finishing up trying to get ready and moving along with the timeline. Like that aspect of the ceremony and of the wedding day gets lost. Like that's the whole point of why we're here is, you know, it's two people joining together under the Lord. So like, why not make it so intentional? And I love how you said you plan those moments out, because even like as a photographer, I've had brides come up to me and they're like, we want a picture of like all of my bridesmaids praying over me and stuff like that. And I'm like, I love that. But from a photographer standpoint, I'm like, I don't want to like make that happen because I want it to happen organically.
Yeah.
But I love that you said that you do plan it because it can make it more intentional. So I feel like that's an interesting perspective.
I think when you take time, I think this like applies to life and with weddings, but like when you take time to plan things, for me personally, like it says that that's a priority to me. And like we always say at church, like prayer is our first response and not our last resort. So for me, when I'm planning a wedding day, I'm like, okay, I want prayer. If it's a couple that, you know, prays, I want prayer to be intertwined in their whole wedding day, and I want to plan it because I want that to be, that is such a huge part of their lives outside of their wedding day. Why not would you why would you not have it be a huge part of one of the most important days of your life?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a planner, you're at the center of everything. So you're like planning the day. You get to see it from all different perspectives, which is really cool. And the one thing that if I was planning a wedding, I think could get lost at times is being the intentionality, especially if they're a believer. It's like keeping that at the center of everything.
Yeah.
Because you're also, you know, working with other vendors, whether it be catering, whether it be a rental company, photographer, videographer, you know, all these different aspects of the day. And then, you know, dealing with the bride as well as coordinating, communicating with them and their families, where sometimes that can get lost. But having that intentionality with everything that you do, as we're called as believers, like, hey, you want to do it at your 100%,
Right.
you know, go all in into it. And I think that's huge, where if you go in with that mindset and everything else in your actions follow through with it, you know, their day gets even blessed even more, to be honest, because of that intentionality behind it. You know, the root of it is coming from a good place.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it takes like a little bit of like compartmentalizing, because like you're working with vendors, something may go wrong, you know, like rental company forgot something, whatever. I could be stressed about like some of the mishaps that are happening. And then when I go into the bridal suite, it's like before I walk in, it's like, okay, take a deep breath. Bride doesn't need to freak out. Bride doesn't need to know about any of this. I'm going to go in there, check and see how hair and makeup is coming, all of that stuff. And I kind of have to like check my attitude, not even attitude, but like my posture of like, okay, how am I about to walk into this room? Am I representing Jesus? Like, am I bringing added stress that I don't need to bring into this room? Like, and I have to kind of stop before I go into the bridal suite and just be like, okay, let's make sure that she feels super excited and super at peace and like kind of change that mindset. So it's like all compartmentalizing.
It's very true. And honestly, like when I think of planners at times, because I've been on wedding days and I see great things happen and some really bad things happen.
I was just going to comment on that.
I was going to say, you guys are really like a punching bag, because you take all the blows, whether it be from the family or the vendors and things. And you guys got to be able to like stay focused. Yep.
Yes.
Take it all in.
Yep.
But then just stay focused on the mission of that day. It's getting the couple married and then having an amazing night. That's not easy whatsoever.
But if I can be the punching bag so that my bride and groom aren't the punching bag, like if I can absorb like the stress, like all the mishaps, like anything that happens in that day, if I can absorb that and then they don't have to, or like maybe like it comes as like, oh my gosh, this is a big terrible thing that happened. Okay, I'm gonna absorb it, and maybe the bride does find out a small thing about it, but at that point I've already come up with a solution. It's already fixed. Like they're finding out like at the end of the night, they're like, oh, I didn't even know that went wrong, and I'm like, great, that was the goal.
That was the goal. You know what, like what comes to my head is like, how are you guys able to do that?
Yeah.
Because because me as a guy, I'm like, oh man, it's hard for me to like you get thrown all like let's say a wave of negativity, right? Or all
Mm-hmm.
these things or
Yeah.
communication dealing like how do you deal with that? Like communicating with so many people, asking for so many different things.
Yeah.
Like it just
Yeah.
feels for me it would never be the job I would ever want. So like how are you guys able to just do that?
I think it can be really difficult. I think the more prepared me and the vendors are walking into the day, the less of that day of like shock and negativity comes out because we're all so prepared. It's one of the reasons I like working with vendors that like I know and I trust because I know that they're professional and like if something goes wrong, they're not gonna come to me and like lash out. So like on the vendor side of things, I feel like I avoid that for the most part by working with trusted vendors, but then also even when I work with vendors I don't know, just by coming in super prepared and making sure my vendors are really prepared in advance. They know me, I know that they've looked over the timeline. Like I'm just extra prepared with my vendors so that I don't have to worry about that as much with vendors. Family is a little bit more unpredictable. You can't really control that. So I would say the most of like negativity or like shock or like kind of those like, okay, I need to like absorb this and then move on. I would say comes more from like either accidents that happen with the vendors, like not
Yeah.
intentional things, or it comes from family members a lot of
Mm.
times. And you just have to take it. And I think I honestly, Jesus is how I get through. There's some wedding days. There's been some where
You're
it's like,
Lord, I'm gonna need you real good right now.
literally, I can think of like a couple in my mind where I've like had to like, okay, Jesus, I really need you right now. I would like to go find a bathroom and cry. But I'm not gonna do that because I'm a professional and I know that I can handle this. And I mean, I always handle it. So, and
Yeah.
that's honestly just because of God.
No,
Yeah.
that's I mean,
That's crazy.
my wife is a medical social worker and she works with babies and like when certain things aren't going very well, like it's hard.
Mhm.
And I'm like, because you're dealing with your emotion, and she's a mother as well too, and so it's like when you're dealing with so much negativity, like how do you release it? And
Yeah.
and
Right.
obviously, there's tools, and she does like therapy and stuff
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be able to
yeah.
like get it all out and communicate and talk about it. But for you, when it comes to really planning and forming a team of vendors that you really trust, like what's your mindset and your approach to that of how do I find the right vendors for my couples that are gonna one represent me well, but also give the couple what they've asked for and
Mm.
what they really want.
Yeah, when I meet with my vendors and I talk about like forming a vendor team, I always talk to them about finding vendors that fit their needs, style, and budget. Like those are the three things that I'm like, I want to get to know my
Mm,
couples. I want to get to know what they need, like for every area, for every vendor. What do you need? What's your style? Like what's the vision of your wedding day? What style photography, videography, like overall, what's your style, hair, makeup, all that type of stuff? And then what's your budget? Because as the planner, I'm a lot of the times, if it's full planning, I'm the one that's worrying about the budget. And so wanting to find vendors that fit need, style, and budget is a huge thing for me. And then on top of that, like behind the scenes is I'm wanting to work with people that I know are professionals and that I know I can trust. And I would say like 80% of all vendors that I've ever worked with would fall into that category. And then, sometimes you work with a vendor and I'm like, okay, I'm probably not going to recommend, and it may not even be one that I had recommended, but it's one that my bride had found and really liked. So we go with it, and then occasionally you make a mental note in the back of your mind. You're like, okay, when I'm building a team for the next wedding, that vendor is not going to be on that list. But for the most part, I find that most of the vendors that I work with are super great, super professional, laid back in the right areas, but then also on point in the areas that it needs to be on point for. Like it's a good mix between like making sure that things are done with like professionality and like on time and like punctuality and all of those things, but also not being so type A that you're like stressing about like I don't need a vendor to add more stress to the wedding day. I need vendors to be able to be as relaxed and calm as possible, because if they're bringing their stress into the wedding day, if every vendor brought their stress into the wedding day and my bride is obviously bringing a little bit of stress into her wedding day, I would not be able to handle it. That's too much. That is too much stress that I'm trying to absorb out of the atmosphere, and I cannot do it. So I need vendors that I can trust are going to be there, and they're going to enjoy the day. They're going to bring a lot of positivity. They're going to be relaxed, but also professional.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
And you know,
huge.
this could be a hot take too as well, in a sense,
All
because
right,
I'm
diving
always
in.
like super interested to understand what your guys' perspective is when it comes to selecting vendors. And I'll speak more for like my experience and for video wise. And I know I've talked to Ashley about it too as well. It's like, okay, when we get reached out by a planner and like, for example, a full wedding planning services, like what's your guys' like process or way of thinking of communicating, right? Just because, especially when you're dealing with so many different types of vendors, right? And we're all independent businesses, and so we all have different processes or systems. And one of the biggest things, at least for me as a creative, like kind of a big pet peeve from planners, that when they're reaching out to me, it's like, hey, are you available for this date, for this amount of hours, and shooter and whatever may be video? I'm like, cool. Sure, I could respond and say I am available.
Yeah.
But based on like my style, who I am and how I do things, it's like that doesn't give me enough information I need to whether know if I want to even continue this conversation or maybe they're a match made in heaven, like some of them has been.
Yeah.
No pun intended, but but to be honest, like, sometimes in those situations, it's like, oh man, like I don't know how to go about it from my end, because I'm like, dude, and like, for example, if you're doing full wedding planning and if you have a specific videographer team, do you ever approach to be like, hey, how do you like to get an inquiry, and how do you like to your systems of getting to know the couple to see if they're going to be a good fit for you and they're going to appreciate you as well. And I've only had like maybe a few experiences where planners like actually ask like, hey, what's your process about? Like, hey, are you available for this date? This is the name of the couple. This is how many guests. This is where they're getting married. Just because like we have a whole inquiry form,
Right.
and so the more information I have, the better prepared I am.
Yeah.
And I can either see if this is going to be a good fit or not a good fit. And so, but what's your kind of like approach or mentality on that part?
So with each area, if it's full planning, I want to do like the groundwork for my bride so that they're not doing the groundwork. So if it comes to like photography, videography, I'm going to always fill out the inquiry form first. Like I know that is like a process. I know like for me and my brides, like if they ever like just reach out via email or Instagram, I'm like, hey, head to my website, fill out the inquiry form. I love it when photographers and videographers put the question in there that says who's filling out this form, and it says like bride or like planner or something else. If that is an option, like that's my favorite thing, because I love to be able to let the person know like, hey, I'm a planner filling out this form. I am just trying to gather some information right off the bat. Like, are you available for this day? Like what is if your prices aren't listed on your website, like what's the general price? Because I'm trying to vet like my choices to the bride. So I need to look at and see. I don't want her to have to go to 10 different videographers just to see if they're available and if they fit in her budget. I want to do that groundwork and say like, hey, I reached out to 10 videographers that I feel like fit your style, and here are 3 that are available for your day. First of all, I'm not going to give her a vendor that's not available.
This is a videographer that's available and he's not available.
Exactly. Like I'm not gonna do that.
Exactly.
Or this is a videographer that I think fits your style, but it's not available for your date.
Or like not in your budget whatsoever. So like I'm gonna do that grunt work, and then I'm gonna present like, hey, these are 3 that I think would fit your needs, style, and budget. You take a look at their website, you take a look at their work, take a look at their social medias, let me know what your thoughts are. And if I try to give them around 4 options if I can. Sometimes 5 max if it's like a photographer. I'll give them anywhere from 4 to 5 options, and then I have them like select 2 or 3 that they're interested in. Sometimes they come back and they're like, this is the one. Like I like this one. Or I'll have them tier them, like who's your top pick, who's your second pick, who's your third pick. And then I love to set up calls. I think there's so much about like the chemistry that you have with your vendor team. Like I would want, if I'm getting married, I would want to know my videographer. I would want to know my photographer before I sign on the dotted line. It's one thing to trust a planner and be like, hey, you know, like Ashley's great. She's amazing. But like maybe Ashley and this bride like aren't going to connect, or maybe Javi and this bride and groom aren't going to connect. So I always say like, okay, pick 3 that you really like out of these maybe 4 or 5 that I've selected, and then let's schedule calls.
Yeah.
And then from there, I feel like the bride and groom get a good perspective of who the vendor is, and then the vendor gets a good perspective of who the couple is, what their love story is, can get like inspired a little bit more to create something for their wedding day, and then we go from there and we select from that.
You'd be surprised how many planners don't do that.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
They're just like, let's book.
It has been like that. It's just send the contract over.
Wow.
And that's something that I don't do because it's like, no, I can either be putting myself in a dangerous situation. Right. And that's one of those things where I really want to like bring to light on both sides, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of vendors. So it's like, well, if there is a system, I'm always thinking in systems like what can make our lives much easier in terms of you scouting and locating videographers. And then for us then to, be able to have that contact with the couple, because that's huge. I know for myself, hey, if I'm going to create anything, like from that very first call, I'm already collecting information so that it helps me in terms of making decisions when it comes to editing, and all that. There's reasons why every business has systems and their way of doing things because it always ends up to the end result. Whatever you're providing for them. So I just think that's a huge thing right there that could be improved in our world, really.
I was going to say that it just sets the tone for the wedding day too. When you, like you said, like when you get to know who all your team is for your wedding day, like these are all people that are making your day happen. And when you have a strong connection with all of them, it's going to put you so much more at ease as a bride. Like, if I had no idea who my photographer was, no idea who my videographer was, and they have cameras in my face, it's the morning of my wedding, weird. I'm so nervous. Sorry, I just hit my thing. I'm so nervous to be here, and like I just want to like, all of that stuff. Like it just doesn't feel right. So like you said, like it's so important to like fill out the processes of like, hey, yes, I may be available for this date, but do me and the couple vibe?
Right.
Like, do we get along? Do they feel comfortable around me? Because once they're comfortable around my camera and with me, then their photos will replicate that and show that calmness.
And something I always do when I respond to the emails, or it's like, hey, I'm available. Sometimes depending on like, because for my website I list where our pricing is at, and especially in the contact form, it just makes it much easier for everybody. And so I try to alleviate that stress from like, okay, in terms of budget. But then the next thing I always follow up in the email is saying like, hey, we are available for this date. We'll love to get to know the couple. I do require reschedule a consultation. Right. And I always forward, and sometimes I get responses back and sometimes I don't. Because in a way, I guess my thought process goes to is like, okay, I'm putting that extra layer of work for that planner, but it's one that I'm going to require because I'm not going to set myself up for failure. Because I've had those situations in the past, and that's the reason why I bring it up.
For sure.
And I'll and the thing is that not everybody, like everyone's mindset is very different when it comes to a wedding.
For sure.
And there's different tiers to this too, whereas like there's tiers where it just going to be a transactional experience only, with maybe even with all their vendors for the most part. And then there's tiers where they want an experience. And the experience comes with much more communication and speaking with your team, who you're going to be there.
And getting to know them.
I think for me, like I'm a big systems and processes like girl, like that. I thrive off of that. And I would never book a bride that I haven't talk to first. Like I would never just book someone that I'm going to plan their wedding or even just month of coordinate their wedding that I haven't had like a phone call or a video call with. So why would I expect my vendors to do the same? And then I will say also it does depend on the vendor. Like we're not going to do calls with a rental company. Like that one is very transactional. Even like catering, a lot of that is very transactional. We may do a tasting where they get to meet the bride and groom, but a lot of times you've signed a contract prior to that. But when it comes to creatives and like creative vendors, I do think that relationship is so important, and it's so good to have like that rapport going into a wedding day. And even just for me to have the relationship with the vendor going into the wedding day, like, hey, you know, I've reached out, I've talked to you, I planned a call between you and the bride. Sometimes I'm on those calls, sometimes I'm not. But just like having contact with the vendors so that me and my bride have a relationship with the vendor before they step foot on the venue that day, it changes the game, I think.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it's so important to meet the planner as well. I mean, I love that you do calls like alongside your bride and groom. I feel like as the creative,
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, as the creative who's on those calls and kind of like trying to pitch yourself to the bride and groom and, you know, also the planner, because if they're on their call, it's a little intimidating when they're on the call
That's
too,
what I was
in my
gonna
opinion.
ask. Yeah.
Because I feel like when the bride and groom have a planner on the call, the planner has a bunch more questions, like those hard-hitting questions. Whereas when I just have maybe the bride, I'm kind of more so just getting to know her and like talking to her and kind of seeing if we vibe and then going through packages and stuff. Whereas like planners have more questions that are like hard-hitting. So how do you do this and how do we do this and stuff like that. But it's also so important, I feel like, as creatives to know your planner, because we're going to work alongside each other all day. Like, you know what I mean? And I take initiative on the wedding day too, to always be like, hey, what can I do for you? Like, do you need water? Do you need anything? Because I know how stressful it can be. I've helped you planning weddings before. And I just can imagine, like we've talked about, with being that punching bag and absorbing everything. Whenever I see planners, I always feel like their heads are about to like explode.
They are probably.
And I'm like, hi, I love you. I want to make sure that you're doing okay. Because we are working so closely, and, you know, I want the same outcome as you. I want the bride and groom to have a great day. So
I think it's important. Yeah, I was going to ask that question because I'm always curious if, like, I've heard people say that it's like intimidating to have the planner on the call. And I think I do it like case by case basis. Like sometimes my brides are like, are you going to be on the call? Like, you know, sometimes they're more nervous and they're like, I don't know what to ask. And then in that case, like, yeah, for sure, I'm on the call. And then a lot of the times, if it's a vendor that I know and trust, like if I'm setting you up with a bride, I know that I don't need to be on the call because like all of those hard hitting questions, I know that you've already answered them, or I could get the answer from them at a later date. If it's a vendor that I've never worked with before, I do like to be on the call, but I was always curious as to how that feels to like photographers and videographers. Like, do you prefer planners to be on the call? Do you prefer them not to be on the call?
For me, for video wise, it's been like I've had a few like on the actual consult call, and then I've also had a few like on their final like prep for wedding day. For the most part, they usually don't talk as much. Only
they just listen, which is kind of scary.
Or listen, or don't ask as much questions on the consult side, because it's been more of explaining my process. And like with photo and video, the distinction is that I'm not going off, like, sure, I do work off of a timeline, but I'm not like the main thing, getting these photos, getting these details. I'm just focused on telling a story and capturing the big moments of the ceremony, the speeches, first looks, vow reading. And so I don't have that type of pressure like you do of getting everything in that sense. Where for me, it's like I have a little bit, I feel like I'm more loose to just think creatively. And so I'm really just getting to know who they are, their story, asking them questions. We do go over finally like the brochure, we review it. I explain it to very much in depth. And I'm very good at like asking questions, and like the contact form already gives me majority of the information, but anything that I do need, then I start getting it. And the way I like to do it's like, hey, I'm going to steer you to the direction of what you've asked for based on our conversations and what you value, and this is what I would recommend. And I usually try to keep it within that, because that way there's no flexibility. It's like if you go less, you're not going to get what you really wanted for. But so that's on one side, but then on the final consult calls, I do like having a planner there, especially if I needing like, hey, if I don't have a timeline yet, like, hey, when would I receive my
Yeah.
timeline, or the layout of the reception, because I do need that when it comes
Yeah.
to setting up my lights and things of that nature, and then also going over anything that's like unexpected,
Yeah.
that I should know about.
Yeah.
Is everybody going to stand up for reception? Like, is everyone going to have
Please
like
have people sit down.
Why would anyone have anyone?
You'd be
I've
surprised.
heard.
You'll be surprised.
I've heard.
I'm like, okay, that's an interesting format. Okay, so I just need to know these little things
Yeah,
that,
for
because
sure.
they could affect our.
Your guests don't want to stand.
Yeah.
Have them sit down.
Literally.
So I just need to know, like, okay, anything that's out of the ordinary,
Yeah.
that communicate that with me. And logistics is very nice, especially if it's a wedding that's moving from part to part.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, do you guys have transportation for
Transportation.
us as
That
well?
no one ever thinks about That is the one thing no couple ever thinks about
Yeah.
transportation. Those are like always the
Interesting.
planner
It's
questions of like,
huge.
how are you getting from here to here? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't think about that. I'm like, great, let's plan it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when it's one of those that's like in downtown
Yes.
areas. It's like,
Yeah.
There's
okay,
no parking.
no parking.
And I take that into consideration when I create the timeline too. So
Yeah.
if it is a downtown wedding and you're going off site for photo, video at any point, or if you're moving like ceremony venues here and then like reception is over here, I always try to take into account like, okay, we are going to be downtown St. Pete, downtown Tampa. You could map it out and say it takes, this amount of time to get from point A to point B, but what you're not taking into consideration is parking, traffic that time of day,
Yeah.
how long it actually takes to get, the bride and groom are celebrities on their wedding day, and so they also never think about how long it takes to move them from point A to point B.
Yep.
Because everyone wants to stop and talk to the bride and groom,
Yep.
which is great. I love that. And I try to be intentional about scheduling time for them to be able to see all their guests and talk to their guests, but they get stopped so like easily. And so I try to take that into consideration when planning like every aspect of the day, but especially when it comes to transporting from point A to point B on a
Yeah.
timeline.
I love that.
You need to have fluff room in the
Oh, for
timeline.
sure.
You
Absolutely.
need to.
I had a question here. This is kind of like an interesting one.
Okay.
Do you ever advocate for a certain creative, or vendor, just in general, for a couple where it's like maybe budget may be a little bit out of budget, but you feel like, okay, they'll be worth it? Or advocating in the sense of the couple says like, hey, we want photography for only 6 hours, even though it's a 10-hour wedding day,
Oh, yeah.
like to extend more hours or add a second shooter,
Yeah.
things like that.
Especially when it comes to time coverage, for sure, because what they a lot of times don't understand is how long a wedding day takes. I think when you're a guest at a wedding, you don't really think about that, and obviously they've only ever been guests or maybe in the bridal party of a wedding. But then when I sit down with them, they're like, oh yeah, I want this photographer and we can afford them because it's only like we'll only get them for 6 hours. And then I'll say, okay, let's sit down and let's do a rough draft timeline. And we do a rough draft timeline. And I say, if we only get 6 hours, I find that it's better for me to show them instead of saying,
Yeah.
no, you need 10 hours.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not just going to be like, no, you need 10. I want to sit down, let's plan out a rough draft timeline. And then we go through and I'm like, if you have your photographer or videographer for 6 hours, here's where they could start, here's where they'll end, and here's everything they'll be potentially missing. And there's no way for us to fit this stuff into that 6 hours. It's impossible.
because
I
I'm
can't
showing you.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
make it, like, I'm literally showing you how it's impossible. So it's totally up to you as the bride. If you want some of these extra things in here, then we do need to extend. We do need 8 hours. We do need 10 hours, whatever the wedding day calls for. So definitely when it comes to time, I definitely advocate. And then when it comes to like style over budget, I feel like I do in some aspects, especially if they've had a consult call with the photographer or videographer and they've really vibed well with them. They love their work. Like they're like, I could really see this person there at my wedding day. Then I say, okay, this is how much we had budgeted for photography. This photographer is $500 over. Let's look at other areas where are we willing to cut back on so that we can make this work. Because with a budget, I mean, the money always has to be coming from somewhere. It's not just coming out of thin air. Yeah. So if we're going to sacrifice on photo, like if we want more photos, then we need to sacrifice on florals, or we need to not do a late night snack at the end of the night, or whatever it may be. We got to pull the money from somewhere, which is why in all of my first consultations with my brides, I always ask them like a couple questions to try to figure out what is most important to them. And then I try to base my budget around that to a certain degree. But I always ask my brides two questions. I ask them, if budget was not a thought, what would you want your wedding day to feel like? And I listen to their response on that. And then from that, I kind of recognize what's important to them. Like some of them will say like, I want the day, like I want to capture all the memories with my family. Like being around my family and friends is so important to me. Or they'll say like, I want it to just feel like a party. Like I want it to be fun. I want it to be entertaining. Like I want everyone to have a good time. Or maybe they'll say like, I want it to feel like really special. Like I really want like Jesus to be a big priority in the wedding day. I want to take my time with my spouse. Like, so based off of how they answer that question, I can kind of figure out, okay, what's really important to them. And then the second question I ask them is, if your wedding day could look like anything and budget wasn't a thing, what would it look like? And then that more is a design question to help me figure out what's a priority design wise. And then that helps me figure out, okay, how much is it going to cost for design aspects? And then how much do we have for photography and videography, hair, makeup, all the other aspects that need to get put into a wedding day. But those two questions I find really help me figure out who my couple is and what's really important to them. And then I want to prioritize whatever's important to them into their wedding day, and even just creating that budget and vendor list.
I love how you
Wow.
explain that too, because I'm gonna speak to a guy's perspective at times. When you think of planners, you almost, in a way, you kind of feel like it's like a checklist, getting things done and done. But there's so much creativity involved
Yeah.
into it, because you really have to dissect the person, get to understand
Yeah.
their vision, and break it down and communicate it back with them to guiding them to
Yep.
making that decision. You're the expert, you're providing the options here, but then at the end of the day, like they're making the final decision and
Right.
call. But you're being very intentional about the whole process. So
Yeah.
it really is giving me perspective, because
Yeah.
like first thing I'm thinking of as a planner is like, all right, they're getting things done, but it's like, no, they're all very intentional. If
Yeah.
anything, the planner is the one who's most in tune with the couple,
Yeah.
because they have a full overview picture, not just a one-sided view of what they're expecting out of their wedding
Right.
day.
So true.
I think that's huge.
And I think even the contact between like planners and a couple is going to be more contact throughout the planning process than any other vendor. I mean, you guys may have like
yeah.
initial consult calls and then like month of
Yeah.
and that type of thing. But we're working when it's a full planning wedding. Like I'm working with a bride for a year. Like I'm doing multiple calls with them, their mom, their fiance. I'm getting texts and calls constantly from like it's a constant like they know what's going on in my life and like the days that they can't like text and like I'll literally have brides text me on a Sunday morning. They're like, hey, I know you're in church right now. Ignore this until like tomorrow morning or tonight whenever you're free. But like they know me and
Yeah.
I know them. And
Yeah.
so I love that it gives us that rapport on a wedding day. And we really do. I feel like that's such a overlooked important part of a planner's job
Yeah.
is to really know the bride and groom and know their vision, because the more you know them, the more you know their vision, and like the better you can execute their vision.
100%
Absolutely.
agree. Do you find
huge.
yourself like how do you mold that to every single couple? Like I know how I do it for myself, but like in your perspective, right? Like how do you go about, okay, let's say it's Dasha and David, for example.
I
How
love
do
them.
you mold to
My
Dasha and
favorite.
David versus to another couple? And as you're, let's say you're planning full wedding,
Yeah.
full on wedding planning for both of these couples at the
Yeah.
same time. How do you compartmentalize these things?
It's difficult, and I would say every bride is so different. But they tend to fall into one of two categories while they're still all very different. And I would say like you have your brides that like are fully like, I trust you. I trust you. I trust like you get my vision, and I trust that you're going to do everything that you can to make the wedding day as perfect as it can be, and like take all of the elements that are really important to us and like put them in the wedding day. And with those brides, it's really easy to mesh with. Like Dasha and David were one of those couples. And I also know them, so it was a little easier too. It is easier when you like know them. But it's different when you can tell that you have that trust from the bride right away, versus sometimes I have to work a little bit longer to get the trust of the bride. And with those ones, it takes even more of like a nurturing relationship, because they're constantly worried about things, and I'm constantly like reassuring, like, hey, I've got you. Hey,
Yeah.
you hired me for a reason. Like, I'm not gonna let your wedding day like implode. Like, I'm working really hard to make sure that all of the aspects are coming together. And once I can tell when in a wedding planning process I have like won the bride's trust, sometimes it takes like 2 calls. Like maybe it's like the first month and they're like, "Yeah, I trust you. You've got it." And then sometimes it's like it's up until the wedding day and they're like still freaking out about small things, and I'm like, "I've already taken care of that. Like we've got it. We're good, girl. Like just trust me." So I would say like you have to figure out who the bride is, and then you have to work really hard, I think, to earn their trust, because once you get the trust is when my job becomes easier. And it's when they actually get the benefit of having a wedding planner, because then they're not stressing. Because if they hire a wedding planner and then they're still just stressing about every little thing, it's like, why are you planning me? Why are you paying for me to plan the wedding when you still have like like you're not relinquishing like kind of the control, like you're not trusting me. And like there are things that I need brides to, like, I give my brides homework. There's certain things that I can't do, like I can't come up with your guest list. Like I don't know your friends and family. You're gonna have to come up with that. Your seating chart, I'm gonna create a floor plan. I'm gonna tell you how many people we need at each table. I don't know your family dynamics. Like I'm not gonna go through your guest list and say this person should sit with this. Like there are things that even my full planning brides have to do. But I would say figuring out who they are and how much, like how quickly they're going to trust me, and then that relationship kind of changes when they trust me, and everything kind of just falls into place, and the wedding planning process goes a lot smoother.
With planners, I'm very curious because in the videography world, everything is like cater to the planner in terms of like a business thing. And they want always to impress because, there's tiers to everything in life.
Yeah.
And there's tiers in terms to weddings as well, in terms of, type of events that we're doing. And in certain tiers, they're very much is like always cater to the planner. And I find it like a double-edged sword in a way. It's like it's a good thing to like add value to the planner, but also the main priority should always be the couple.
For sure.
Because that's the one who really invested to you. But I do understand that like the planner is going to be around longer than the couple will be, for saying in terms of reoccurring work.
I feel like the planner should be fighting for the couple. So I feel like if you're catering to like the planner and the couple should be on the same side of things. So if you're catering to one, you're catering to the other. I think that's how a good like planner, vendor, couple relationship is like I should always be fighting for my bride. So if you're catering to my bride, then ultimately you're catering to me, because I want what the bride wants, and vice versa. Like if you're catering to the planner, know that I have the bride's best interest or the couple's best interest at heart. And so like when you're catering to me, you're also catering to the couple. I think that's a healthy.
I think it should be like that, but it doesn't always
end up like that.
Very much, because like let's say, for example, the consult with me and the couple was very much on their story element, on their family. They want to feel the energy, the vibe and feeling. But let's say the planner was heavily paid for doing design work and all the details and all these little things, where then it becomes like, let's say on a wedding day, it's like, hey, photo, video, we need to do a whole bunch of details. But when, for me, the primary thing in those calls were focus on the energy vibe of the people there, because that's what we really want to see more of. And so like in that sense, it becomes a conflict of interest.
Yeah, that's a touchy subject.
Very much so is. And I'm bringing it up because this is a platform where we can all get better. Sharpen one another. How can we have these open discussions so that we can align together and be on the same page as much as possible? We know that there's thousands of different vendors out there with different mentality, with different mindset and everything. And so it's like having these open dialogue is huge, because I want to see that improve in our industry. Because personally, I don't like that. I like it when we're all in the same page to serve the couple. And I mean, I know for us three here, it's really rooted by our faith, because the best interest is the couple. We want to do the best things for them, what they've given us. And it's not always like that, but I think having this open discussion and seeing that, and I love your perspective, how you mentioned that, would help this industry a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing for creative wise that we could like talk about a little bit more is like why it's so important to have more than just ourselves there too, like to capture details. So then, I think it's so important. I always advocate for having a second shooter. Like I always tell my brides, I say, I am so good at being everywhere at once, but I really just can't be. Like, and
Very
wedding
much.
days are, and especially when there's multiple
Yeah.
venues and things, like when there's, the
Multiple
bride's getting
venues or
yeah,
setups.
and everything. But I can't be everywhere at once. I try, and I during the ceremony, it will look like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just shot a wedding where I did a first look with the bridesmaids, and I had like their reaction, and then I quickly like went from behind them and like captured her, and I was showing Javi, and Javi was like, "Who's your second shooter?" And I was like, "I didn't
Me.
have one." Yeah,
I was
and I was so it's like I'm good at it, but also like it's so important to have a second shooter there.
Yeah.
So then like if that planner is coming and being like, hey, I need you to capture details, which I mean, for me, I love details on a wedding day. I mean, I feel like like you said, advocates for their story. I mean, like
Yeah.
it is their vision and in a way, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Not to like fully only capture details, but
Yeah.
I take a lot of care into like my couple's portraits and their family photos and all of that stuff, but also their details as well,
Agreed.
their
Yeah.
flat lays and details and everything.
Yeah.
And so if, like you said, where you have that, this is a story aspect and I want to stay with the couple, so I gather as much story elements as possible, you can just send, that's what I do all the time. I'm like, second shooter, go get reception
Yeah.
photos, as many as you can, like different angles, different like
Yeah. And it's interesting because
details.
on that side, let's say for me, right, I'll speak
Yeah.
for myself.
Yeah.
For like video things, it's like, okay, the more angles I have in one moment, the better story I can tell and cut back and forth
Yeah.
in. And so it's like, let's say it's a first look and I only have one angle. It's like, great, I'm limited to one angle.
Sure.
It's kind of hard to move around because you don't want to mess up the moment.
Yeah.
If you want to give them the moment, or cut to a certain scene and stuff, it's like, okay, that's when for video, we can get it. We need to have like 2 or 3 shooters, sometimes 4. I was second shooting a wedding this past weekend where it's like, it needed 4 people, not in the sense that the logistics were crazy. It was more about, hey, we only got like 10 minutes to capture this whole
lot.
scene. And this whole scene was worth a lot of money, like probably just in floors alone, just $100,000
Yeah.
only. And it's like, hey, there's only one man crew and nobody's done and is out the way. And so I can only capture so much with one perspective of
Yeah.
lens. Having another shooter at the same time doing it together, now we got everything in that sense.
Yeah.
I'll be honest too. The bigger the wedding, the bigger the wedding, and they treat it much more like a production. You're gonna need more people to shoot to capture everything involved in that wedding day, whether it be your details, because you don't
Yeah.
want details. You want to incorporate details,
Sure.
especially
Yeah.
if brides
They tell
are
the
very
story.
creative and they put a lot of
Yeah.
effort into it and they envision it, and so you want to capture that. And then, but at the same time, if you want to capture a lot of people,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're like if cocktail is over here, bride and groom is over there in the wedding day. Logistically, this doesn't work very
Makes
well.
sense, yeah.
We're gonna need a team of 3 to 4 people.
Yeah.
If your guest is over 300 people or 500 people, it's very hard to navigate, move around with gear, move around with things. Especially if timelines are very like tight. We're like, hey, you got 10 minutes to do this. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not realistic.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part too, is it just goes back to how important the timeline is and how much fluff room really does go into that 6
Yeah.
hours. Like,
Yeah.
I always say that to my brides, and my brides look at the timeline and they're like, are you sure this is enough time? And I'm like, I promise you,
Yeah.
it's enough time with extra. Like the ones that are more like that hands-on and not as like, are we sure? Like, and I'm like,
Yeah.
she's like, I don't want to, or like whoever, I don't want to be stressed. And it's like, I got you.
The
Like, I
biggest thing.
promise you, I would not let you fail. Like,
Yeah.
and I would not let us fail.
Yeah.
Like, it's me and you together, and
Yeah.
I will have enough time. Like, but I always reassure them things are gonna go off track, and that's okay. That's why we have fluff
Yeah.
room.
Like putting margin into the timeline is the number one hack for me. If anyone out there is planning their own wedding and you're making a timeline, you need 10 times more time for everything than what you think. And the more you plan that out, the less stressful your wedding day will be. And when you get off, like, you will have moments where you're behind on the timeline. I don't always, like, not every wedding day runs like that, but there are weddings where I'm like, okay, we're running a little behind, but I know that I've scheduled extra time. Like, I'll even have photographers say, like, hey, I don't need that full hour for like couples photos. I'm like, great. Awesome.
Great,
you take them
keep it.
for as long as you need them, and then you bring them back to me when they're done, because chances are you're not actually going to start at that time, or chances are, okay, you get done with them early, then that means we can move on to the next thing, or that means the bride and groom can have a moment to themselves before we move into reception or whatever it is. So I always, like, once I sit down, especially with my like month of coordination brides, like they'll come to me, we'll do a month of like call, and they'll give me their rough draft timeline. And the number one edit I make to every single one is, we need more margin. Like, we need more margin in everything. You just don't realize how long things take on a wedding day, how long it may take for you to get your hair and makeup done on a regular day, or how long it may take even just the traffic thing or transportation. Like, it takes 10 times longer on a wedding day. Everything takes longer. So that's my number one like edit to my month of coordination brides, is I go through and I add a ton of margin in their timeline.
Yeah, I just had one of those weddings this past week where we just got done with their couples photos and they went back to the bridal suite, and then I was like, you guys can go join cocktail hour, like you can do whatever. And they're like, I think we're just gonna go back to the bridal suite, and they just like sat next to each other and just chilled and just talked for like 15 minutes, and like just really had a time to like whoa, we just got married. Which is so nice. It was just really important to see as well. It's like, all right, this is good. I love this for you guys. And I'm going to go do other things. You guys have fun.
One thing I've noticed for the video side of things is what I started offering is 10-hour wedding days, because I don't want to feel rushed in setting all my stuff up, getting to one scene to the next, as you know, as the day is unfolding. What I realized is also for couples is that, one, even if they don't need the full 10 hours, you have the full 10 hours, and it just makes the day less stressful. You don't have to worry about if any like last minute changes happens or things get delayed. Even I found that 8 hours isn't really enough for a lot of couples still. And if they do photo and video for 8 hours, let's say, they're usually always rushing to get through things. Because if one thing falls behind, then it's like a chain of things, and now they're rushing through these things, and now they're not enjoying the day as much as they were before, because now they're stressing of getting this thing done before that vendor leaves. And having that 10-hour really makes it like much more enjoyable for them. They're not as stressed, and what the nice thing is, like, even if there is a delay, nobody's stressing about it, because we have them for 10 hours. And that's been a really good sweet spot. And there's been a few weddings where like, hey, they needed 12-hour days, where it's like, because there's so much going on, or like logistics and transportation, and it takes 30 minutes to get here, another 30 here, you know, that's an hour already gone. And so and you have to make up that hour some way, somehow, and you just got to add it on. But you really do, from video perspective and even photo perspective, it's like, you know who's a really good planner, because they'll make the day feel very seamless and feel very not rushed and feel good. And with a couple, is just they actually have that time for themselves, where they can sit back and relax and just celebrate what they just went through, you know, like, hey, we're married, and they can have that time with cocktail with family and friends. And I do say that does come with having resources for the couples to be able to do that and plan out their day, but it makes a world of a difference when you do that.
I think there's like a weird divide of planners, where I think there are some planners that are a lot more design oriented, and they care a lot about the design of the wedding. And I care a lot about the design of the wedding day. But to me, there's so much more to a seamless wedding day than what the tables look like. I'm going to make sure the tables look like what we planned. But like, to me, I want to look at the whole wedding day and not just the details, not just the tables. I want to make sure my guest experience is good. There's someone to greet them when they walk in, show them. I hate it when guests are walking around. They're like, where do I put this card? I want someone at the door that's like, hey, the card box is right over. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's like being in ministry or like the level of excellence that we do things at church, that I try to look at the whole day and not just like, I want the tables to be perfect. I do want them to be
Right.
perfect.
Right, but you want the experience of the day to
I feel
feel
like the
perfect.
experience is more important than the design of a table.
100% agree.
But
Yeah.
I feel like that is where a lot of the difference in planners and planners specifically. I think coordinators get that a little bit, but I think there's a huge divide. And I don't know. Maybe people would rather have a planner that focuses on, I think if you have a high budget wedding, then maybe, but like
Yeah,
I
I
just
feel
feel
like
like
there
the
should be an
experience.
even I feel like there should be an even playing field though. I
I,
mean, with it.
honestly, I think there should be a better like way of marketing themselves
Yeah.
in that sense, where it's like if you want to design
Yeah.
elements to be the forefront of your
Yeah.
wedding day, then you should label yourself as that.
Yeah.
Compared to like, okay, now, hey, I'm all about experience on
Yeah.
the wedding day, where design does play an element, but we
Yeah.
want your guests and everybody to feel
And
amazing
you and
and
like
you be the
and the
priority.
yes.
I think that's huge
Yeah.
because, for photo and video, we separate ourselves by calling ourselves like documentary or cinematic
Yeah.
or whatever it may be. It's like, I think that should be a really good way for, planners being able to market themselves and
Yeah.
distinguishing themselves from one another, because it is huge in terms of even vendors and their approach. Like, how do I work with this planner in a sense? If they
Yeah.
care about design, okay, I know that design is an element that they care
Yeah.
about. They're really good at this. They put a lot of effort and time.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, look, this is how I can approach this situation, versus where it's like the experience element of
Yes.
things.
And I do see some planners market themselves and it says like wedding planner and designer. And I think that's good. And I think that may be the direction in the industry. Like there may be a split of like, I could see people becoming like either a wedding designer or a wedding like planner coordinator. Like I could see that potential, especially in like big budget weddings. I could see that split almost, because it's almost too much to do all of it. It's hard to not like focus fully on one and not let the other like fall a little bit. Like I said, I feel like for me, I'm so much more experience of the day. I want that to feel seamless, and I want to think through how we can make it feel seamless in every area. That to me, it like the tables are important and I'm gonna do what we planned, but I'm not gonna spend 40 minutes folding a napkin to perfection because of one photo that's gonna be taken of it, when I could be with my bride and my photographer making sure that they have everything they need so that they feel at peace and that we stay on time, and like all of the things that go into making a wedding day feel fun and comfortable and like relaxed.
Agree.
Right. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to remember the flowers or like the things that are superficial. They're going to remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And from a photographer standpoint, like I always bring that into every day too. I always say like, I want my experience to be just as good as the final product.
Yeah.
Like if you didn't like the experience, like I didn't do my job. So it's so important, because at the end of the day, like, yes, you're going to get beautiful photos, but like, how did I make you feel on your day? Like, did I give you a sense of peace?
Yeah.
Did I help you in every way that I could?
Yeah.
And, bringing that extra step of like, hey, your experience on your wedding day should be special and you should be celebrated, and I want to execute that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think also like, I want to make sure that your family is able to enjoy it. Like that's one of the planner coordinator like things too, is like, I want to make sure your mom, your sister, your maid of honor, they get to experience your wedding day with you. And I want them, like,
that's huge.
How does their wedding day make them feel? Like your mom, like she only gets to see you get married one time. I don't want her stressing about how a napkin looks. Like I don't want her stressing when the rental company shows up late. Like I want her to be able to be fully with you and experience that moment. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that's not always the priority. Like the feeling and the experience of a wedding day isn't always the priority with some planners, coordinators.
I agree.
Right.
And that's been my experience. That's why I bring up that topic, because I want to bring that out to open dialogue, and not just for us here, but anyone who's listening or watching can contribute to this conversation and really help this, right? Like that's one thing where I just want to see this industry as a whole get better at.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of educators out there that are always pushing like, serving catered to the planner. I think yes, but it's like if it's design and that's what the couple ultimately cares for, then it's like, okay, we're gonna adapt to that.
Right.
But if it's experience and there's a disconnect because maybe planner is all about design, it's like, okay, planner might not like the videographer, but the videographer and the couple are always going to be tight because, hey, that's what you requested from me.
Yeah.
That's my approach and what I'm known for doing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of those things where I just want to really bring that up for dialogue for us to all get better in, because I know that like you said, you have a lot of compartments that you're working with vendors and type of vendors, and then also with the bride and their family and what they're wanting, what they've laid out to you. And I do believe that planners ultimately know, for the most part, know the couple better than almost any other vendor out there.
Yeah.
um and like I only get to understand the couple for one perspective,
Mm.
from the questions I'm asking them, from what I'm needing and the information, but I don't know the entirety of the whole wedding day situation,
Yeah.
what that looks like.
Especially like I find like family dynamics play a big role in like the planning. Like I know whose parents are divorced. I know what people can't be in the same rooms with other people. Like you kind of, as you plan a wedding with someone for a year, like you get to know them and you get to know their family a lot of times. And then you go through all like the seating chart and all of this stuff. And so like you learn not just who the couple is, but you even learn who their family is. And I think that is like an important thing on the wedding day too, because you kind of have to like navigate. Families are messy. Families are
Very
always
much.
messy. And so, I mean, it's always an interesting dynamic of like, how are we going to make sure that everyone feels comfortable? How are we going to make sure we honor everyone and like not put them in an awkward situation that they don't want to be in? And so I think not even just learning who the couple is, but as you plan a wedding, you just learn more about who the family is too.
Very true.
And then you get their respect a little bit on the wedding day too. Like if a family member comes in and I already know that, I'm like, oh, you're Uncle Jim, like you're gonna be walking down, like we got you third in line, like I'm so glad you're here. Like they recognize that. And most of the time, like family members, like for the most part, like they'll know my name, and like we joke around at the rehearsal. I kind of get that rapport with them, and that makes the whole wedding day smoother. And I think it makes it where like, okay, if they did have an issue, if they did want to be negative, they actually already know me and we have that rapport. So it's like whatever they were going to be really mean and negative about comes out a lot nicer. It's like,
because
oh,
they
I,
know
I
you.
didn't know I
Yeah.
was going to be sitting here. That's okay though. Thanks, heaven. Versus like, I wasn't super friendly and bubbly and nice to them at the rehearsal. I wasn't joking around with them. I wasn't being like friendly. And then they're like, I can't believe I'm sitting here. Like my
You
back
made
is
this
towards the dance
happen,
floor.
and blah,
Like
blah,
you
blah.
need to change this. It's like, I want to work hard to know the family and get that respect from them, so that on the wedding day, the little things that they may be upset about, because everyone's going to be upset about something,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's a lot smaller and not a big deal when it doesn't need to be a big deal.
Agree.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's really cool too, from a creative side. Getting to work rehearsals are
Yeah.
so much fun.
I love
because
rehearsals.
you get to
Yep.
meet the family, and it's
Yeah.
awesome because it's like a, hey, I'm gonna be taking your photos
Yep.
tomorrow. And like you said, I'm like, when I'm yelling at you to get in my family photos, you're gonna be like, oh, hey, Ashley, sorry,
Yes.
I'll get right
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
Instead of, oh, this photographer is
Yeah.
really pushy. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? We already have that connection. I want to get to know your family, and I want to get to know like who they are, and I want to joke around with them
Yeah.
and like be my bubbly self with them, so they like have this genuine connection, and then we can vibe throughout the day and just make the day a
Yeah.
lot like more positive, even though there are stresses that like
Yeah.
pop in.
Agree.
I had a bride one time. Her grandma had been really, really sick, and she was like, I don't know if she's going to be able to make it. We had her walking in the processional. Like they were really worried for her, and then she ended up like pulling through, like got better, was able to come to the rehearsal, and I like met her. I was like, hi, Nana. Like they called her Nana,
Aw.
and I was like, I've been praying for you. Like I'm so glad that like you're doing better. Like I'm so happy that you're here. Like I want to make sure that we, give you enough time to walk down the aisle, all of those things. And the bride ended up, a lot of times they'll send like thank you notes or something to vendors later. And she was like, it meant so much to me that like you took extra care of my grandma, and like that you had remembered she had been like, I think those things are so important to like the quality of providing like a service to not just a couple, but to their whole family.
Yeah.
Agree.
Oh, so important. That's so beautiful.
I love
cute.
people.
Like people are just so sweet.
You know what?
I
That-
know.
that
We're
right
in the
there
right
is-
industry when we love people. And
You're in a
serving
great
people.
industry, because you have to love people in order to be in this industry.
Yeah.
You know, people that just say, man, I just hate people. I'm like, dude,
I
you're in the wrong
know.
business, because this
Yeah,
is all
that's
about
all we're
serving
doing.
your couples, serving their families, being there, being present, and doing it to the best of your ability. There's a lot of people out there to just take it for a paycheck. And I think that's what frustrates me the most is when I just see that, because I'm like, these are, one in a lifetime, hopefully, event that's happening. and it's a big thing that I take seriously for my couples, and the amount of work and effort I put into, and the behind the scenes, working 7 days a week to get these films done, shooting, and then figure out time with family because I care about what I do, and not everyone does, but it's one of those things where, hey, like, how can we raise the standard in this industry? And you have to love people in order to do this. But I do want to put you in the hot seat here.
Okay.
So I might be divisive.
Okay.
But
Ooh.
what do you think is most important? Photo or video
Oh.
for for rehearsal
no.
dinner. For rehearsal dinner.
Oh, for rehearsal dinner?
Yeah, I know I would lose when it comes to a
Oh.
wedding day, but
Oh.
So I already know where I
rehearsal dinner.
stand.
For rehearsal dinner, honestly, don't hate me.
I know.
I feel like video.
I believe that too.
And
I think that's really, I don't disagree.
for a timeline perspective too, on a wedding day, if we can take those toasts and if we can move most of them to the rehearsal dinner, and you can get video of the toasts at the rehearsal dinner versus on the wedding day, or like if you want a bunch of people to give a toast and like let's pull some of those to the rehearsal dinner, we're gonna have your videographer there. They're gonna get all those. They'll weave it into the wedding day. I think it helps probably videographers tell a better story when they get
Agree.
those extra like moments, like a whole extra event. So yeah, I would definitely say video for rehearsal dinner.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If it was wedding
Oh,
wedding
yeah.
day, I would argue photography.
For wedding
I
day,
heard.
I already know in that sense.
Yeah.
But for rehearsal dinner, that's something I've seen couples just choose photo, and I'm like, video would do it much more justice.
agree.
And it's because it's capturing raw elements, and like in photos, like, yes, it is nice because you build rapport with the family, you have this aspect, but when I'm speaking just creatively and what their final deliverables are, I think with rehearsal, it's like if I mic up the bride and groom and they're interacting with their guests and I'm capturing those bite-sized
Yes.
moments, I can weave it into the story
Yeah.
much better, and the deliverable will be much better because they'll be able to relive that moment and be there again.
Yeah.
I think back to like my rehearsal, like in rehearsal dinner, and I'm like, I wish I don't have photo or video from it, but like I think a lot of my emotions hit me that day of like, oh my gosh, all of my friends from all different seasons of my life are here. They've all flown. Half of them had flown to a different state. Like all my family's together. Like that's such a special day, and like I wish I would have had some way to like watch that back and be like, I remember like crying, like just seeing all of my like wedding party and my family and like Walt's family there. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful, but I don't have anything from that. So I think that's a great that's a great aspect to add to a wedding video.
Yeah. And that's something I'm pushing for. I've been working hard even in myself designing things because I want to be there to capture those moments.
Yeah.
It just tells a better story.
Yeah.
They'll get more deliverables out of it. And it just feels more complete because now you can involve other people in.
Yeah.
And if I'm telling a story, I'm thinking about my characters. Sure, the bride and the groom are the protagonists. They're like the main characters. But who are the supporting characters as well? Best man, maid of honor.
Yeah.
Then you got your officiant. But who else can we add into this mix, or show a different side of the bride and groom? Whether they go out golfing the day before, or they, girls go have a brunch somewhere else. Like those little elements just help tell a better story, and there's a place for everything. So
yeah, I saw this tip from something on social media that was like, if you want to save time with toast during your reception, do an open mic at your rehearsal dinner. And I was like, I think that's a really great idea, and especially because Javi and I have talked, and like toasts and speeches and the officiant speaking really set the storyline and like for the day and for the video.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it makes my life
completely.
easier because now I know who I need to focus and shoot a little bit more of and get footage because they reference this or the other.
I have a question for you. How bummed are you when the toasts are awful?
Oh, very.
Because I feel like that affects you a lot
Very
because
much.
that gets weaved into the wedding video.
To paint the picture, if the officiant is no good, if the toasts are no good, if the bride and groom elects like, hey, we don't want to be mic'd up or we don't want to have any of our audio in the film, then it's pretty much a montage at that point. So it's not really a film. It's much more like a recap highlight of the day.
Okay, yeah.
Now, that is something that I do market myself, and I say that's not what I offer because starting the beginning of this year, every bride and groom knows that I mic them up. that's really not an option. If anyone hired me previously from that to where we're at now, then it is an option for
Okay.
them because that wasn't laid out in the beginning. And so the way I'm able to tell these stories authentically is like I need material to work
Yes.
with, and that's what inspires me. So that's one. But if speeches aren't good, I try to look for those raw moments.
Yeah.
What I have done at wedding days, where just to give myself a little bit of extra elements to a film, is like I'll just do candid interviews real quick.
Oh
If I
yeah,
find
I love
people there,
those.
and whether or not they make it into the film, if I can add it at the end or the
Yeah.
beginning, then at least it gives me something to
Yeah.
work with and
Yeah.
play around.
It's so much fun.
And that way I don't have to rely too much on speeches.
Speeches. Okay.
But yeah, speeches do play a part, and I always tell on like on those final calls, it's like,
Yeah.
hey, speeches are really big, is what really
Yeah.
helps sets the tone of the film. And so, but I say that there's levels to this, and I feel like when I really did first start, there were like non-quality speeches
Oh yeah.
where they're kind of all over the place, and it doesn't really paint a picture about the bride or the groom.
Yes.
And those are the ones that's like, okay, what was this all about? Right? Was it about yourself, or was like,
I send out like a toast writing 101 like guide to all of my
that's
toast
so good.
givers.
Ooh, all right.
Especially maybe not with like month of coordination. I do that a little bit less, but with my full planning and with my partial planning, I get in their like timeline questionnaire that I send out at 3 months. I get the names and emails of all of the toast givers.
Yeah.
And then I send them about a month before the wedding. I send them, it's literally called Toast Writing 101. And I give them like tips and tricks for like writing a toast or a speech. And when like they're like really basic stuff, but I find that it's really helpful because a lot of times these people have never done public speaking before.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to give them like just the basics of like, hey, start with your name and how you know either the bride or
Yeah.
groom. Like tell a story, like, kind of just those like I don't want to write it for them, but like kind of giving them an outline of like, don't include too many inside jokes because absolutely no one will get it, and everyone's gonna be like, what are they talking about?
Exactly.
Like, don't only focus on the bride or the groom, like whoever like wrap it like at the end, like tie it back to like, and then you met Samantha, and like I've seen how you like you tie it back into it's their wedding day, not just like I'm talking about how I'm best friends with this guy since I've like been born, and then you're like, congrats, and then you walk like no, like tie it back into like, hey, and now it's your wedding day, and like so I try to do that. Sometimes they listen to me and they read them, and then I think sometimes either the alcohol gets to them first or they just don't read it, and I'm like, that was still not great, but at least I tried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool that you do that. That's so helpful, I bet.
Love it.
So final question to kind of wrap everything up. What was your favorite wedding that you ever did and why?
I feel like I'm biased to the people that I know because those are like extra special. One of my favorites was actually one that Javi worked with me, and it was David and Dasha's wedding. This was back in 2022, I think.
March.
I loved a lot of the weddings I did early in that year, but theirs specifically, I know them, so it was like a lot more personal. I had known Dasha for a long, long time, and then I loved their wedding day, felt very peaceful. And then the other thing is their design of their wedding day was so them. Like and there were so many like personal touches into the wedding day, into the design. Like even like there were like personalized name cards that Dasha had painted, my bride had painted herself because she is a creative at heart. And so like they had designed a lot of their signage and like really wanted like a strong like family feeling. We had like family style tables, which I love. Like I think it was like special moments. Like she's got a really great relationship with her dad. And like I just think through like all of like the family dynamics, and like I just loved the whole day because the whole day I feel like felt very peaceful, but also very like Jesus filled. And also the design, like every aspect of like a planner of like the experience and the design and the family dynamics, it all like meshed really well. And it I don't know, it was just really beautiful. And I loved working. I have so many, I feel like biased saying that, but especially the ones of the people that I know tend to mean the most to me, which I guess makes sense. But yeah, that one was one that has stood out to me.
Yeah, and I think it's really beautiful that you can totally just sense a shift when like Jesus is in the room, like, and when Jesus is at the heart of the ceremony and the day. It's like you can feel it from every aspect.
I could do a whole podcast just about that.
Oh yeah.
The difference between, I feel like, people who have a relationship with Jesus versus like maybe a non-Christian wedding is like you can feel it like so quickly, like the difference. And I love working with Christian couples, because there is like a piece about it that I feel that isn't always there on other wedding days, where even when something goes wrong or goes unplanned, it's like, it's okay, because like I'm marrying the love of my life, and like we get to start our new life together. Like like today is the first day of like the rest of our life together.
Yeah.
And that is so much more of a priority for them, I feel like.
Agree.
And other couples, I feel like sometimes a wedding day is looked at as like a party or a celebration, and it is a celebration for sure, but it's like the first day of the rest of your life together. And like, how cool is it that you get to have all your friends and family around to witness that? But really, it's about you and your spouse. And I think the days where that is priority are the days that, any day where that's a priority is my favorite wedding day. We'll put it like that. It's just, it's so beautiful, and the atmosphere just feels different.
Well, Heaven, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and hang out with us and just chat. Where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at heavenlycollective.co. And my website, heavenlycollective.co as well.
Javi, where can they find you?
At sundial.creatives on Instagram and sundialcreatives.com.
And you can find me at Ashley Jade Photography LLC on Instagram and on my website. And you can find us at the 2717 podcast on Instagram, TikTok, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I don't know what you listen on or watch on, but you should do that. So listen to our other episodes if you haven't already. Like, subscribe, comment, all the things. And we will talk to you guys in the next episode.